A long time ago, in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, a great city was rising, Uruk. The king of Uruk, Gilgamesh, was a man stronger, wiser, and braver than all other kings. However, Gilgamesh's strength was coupled with his cruelty towards his people. Gilgamesh was a half-god, half-human being. His power and physical strength were so great and unparalleled that he was almost like a god. As a result, his people watched him with both fear and admiration. Yet, this power did not come with the responsibility to be just. Gilgamesh's tyrannical rule often subjected his people to suffering. Men were forced to work, and women were treated like slaves to serve him. Gilgamesh wanted to be at the forefront of every task in Uruk, using his people solely for his own benefit. Despite being a brave leader in battles, the suffering of his people in Uruk did not concern Gilgamesh. He had convinced himself of his greatness in the eyes of both the gods and his people. However, there was a void in his heart. This emptiness isolated him, leading him to torment his people. The people of Uruk could no longer endure the years of oppression. They began praying to the gods, pleading, "Help us escape from Gilgamesh's tyrannical rule." The cries that caught the gods' attention moved them into action. The gods decided that they needed to restore balance to this suffering. They concluded that Gilgamesh's power was too great and that, without checks, his people would continue to suffer. However, they realized that they needed to create a being who could balance Gilgamesh's ego. The gods decided to create a being that could stand against Gilgamesh. This being had to carry the pure spirit of nature. It should have the strength to challenge Gilgamesh, but also embody a force similar to his. This is how Enkidu was created. Enkidu represented the wild power of nature in its purest form. He began to live in the forests, far from humans and civilization, among the wild animals. At first, animals were his companions, and humans were an unknown concept to him. He roamed freely in the wilderness, living by his own rules. As a being who spent his life in the depths of the forest, Enkidu carried the power of nature and was unaware of the human world. However, one day, a hunter in Uruk noticed Enkidu. The hunter devised a plan to humanize Enkidu and sent a woman named Shamhat to him. Shamhat was a temple prostitute in Uruk, sent to humanize Enkidu. She began teaching Enkidu not only the pleasures of the body, but also the fundamental secrets of humanity. Shamhat guided Enkidu out of his wild nature and introduced him to human emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. In a short time, Enkidu severed his ties with the animals and began learning what it meant to be human. He was no longer the king of wild animals, but a being on the path to humanity. This process of humanization restricted the freedom within Enkidu, but at the same time, it gave him an identity. During the time spent with Shamhat, she also introduced him to the life and societal order of Uruk. Enkidu finally decided to leave nature and set off toward Uruk. The gods wanted Enkidu to go to Uruk and stand against Gilgamesh's tyrannical rule. When Enkidu arrived in Uruk, he gazed at the city with great admiration. In his eyes, Uruk represented the symbol of civilization. However, the person who laid the foundation of this civilization was Gilgamesh, and this man was trampling on his people to satisfy his own ego. When Enkidu decided to enter Uruk, he became a well-known figure among the people. However, the moment he set foot in the city, Gilgamesh immediately noticed his presence. The encounter between the two men led to a great conflict in Uruk. Gilgamesh saw Enkidu as a threat and decided to fight him. A fierce battle broke out between the two men, each admiring the other's strength. Enkidu represented the power of nature, while Gilgamesh was the leader of his people. However, at some point, the fight transformed into something else. Both began to understand each other's strength and character. Amid the struggle, a respect developed between the two. This respect led to the end of the fight, and they approached each other in a friendly manner. Gilgamesh was in awe of Enkidu's strength, while Enkidu noticed the loneliness that plagued Gilgamesh. This battle was not just a conflict, it was the birth of a friendship. After forming a strong friendship, Gilgamesh and Enkidu embarked on great adventures together. Both admired each other's strength and overcame challenges side by side. Their journey was not just a physical exploration, but also a spiritual one. However, at some point, they had to face the inevitable realities of life. One of their first great adventures was the task of killing Humbaba, a monstrous creature outside of Uruk. Humbaba was a giant and terrifying monster under the protection of the gods. He posed a great threat to the people of Uruk, but being under the gods' protection made killing him an impossible task. Nevertheless, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, with their trust in each other, bravely ventured into this danger. When they confronted Humbaba, dealing with the monster's terrifying strength proved to be a challenging feat. But together they fought and managed to defeat Humbaba. As they returned to Uruk victorious, the entire city celebrated their heroism, but their victory had drawn the wrath of the gods. The gods were not pleased with Gilgamesh and Enkidu's triumph. In their eyes, killing Humbaba was an offense, and there would be consequences for this action. The gods began to devise a plan to punish Enkidu. And so, Enkidu's death became the turning point in the story. His death was deeply dramatic. The gods punished Enkidu. As a result of the gods' wrath, Enkidu was struck by a terrible illness. His body weakened, and as he writhed in pain, Gilgamesh tried every possible way to help him, but he could not change the gods' decision. Enkidu looked at Gilgamesh one last time, knowing he was going to die, and forced him to reflect on the meaning of life and death. Enkidu's death plunged Gilgamesh into deep sorrow. Losing Enkidu's body was not just a physical loss for Gilgamesh, but also a journey into the depths of his soul. Enkidu's death was a great calamity for both Gilgamesh and Uruk. Gilgamesh saw Enkidu not only as his closest friend, but also as a brother. Together, they had fought through hardships and completed each other in every sense. Enkidu's loss created a huge void in Gilgamesh's heart. His loss was not only the death of a friend, it was also Gilgamesh's confrontation with the inevitable reality of death. After the loss of Enkidu, Gilgamesh lived in sorrow for a long time. He felt as though he had lost everything, for Enkidu had always been by his side to prevent him from being alone. His loss caused Gilgamesh to experience a deep inner void and led him to questions he had never considered before. What is the meaning of life? Is immortality possible? When will death come for me? These questions began to occupy Gilgamesh's mind. The loss of Enkidu forced him to confront the inevitable truth of death. Gilgamesh, no longer just a king, became a man on a quest for immortality. Immortality was no longer just a legend. It became a real goal for Gilgamesh. The loss of Enkidu had driven him to seek this pursuit. If there was a way to escape death, Gilgamesh was determined to find it. With these thoughts in mind, he set out on his journey and decided to find the wise Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim was a man who had been granted immortality by the gods. Gilgamesh intended to learn the secret of immortality from him. Utnapishtim explains to Gilgamesh that he is embarking on a long journey and that immortality is not possible for humans. For Utnapishtim, learning this secret is meaningless because immortality is a gift granted only by the gods. At first, Gilgamesh struggles to believe this, but over time, he accepts that life is temporary. Utnapishtim teaches him that while life is fleeting, death is not the end, and he shows Gilgamesh how valuable life truly is. This lesson becomes a turning point for Gilgamesh, and he eventually gives up his quest for immortality, learning to accept life as it is. Gilgamesh finally returns to Uruk. However, he no longer returns merely as a king, but as a man who has discovered the true meaning of life. His return marks a turning point for the people of Uruk as well. After Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh begins to rule his people with more justice. As a leader who has accepted the fleeting nature of life, he guides his people not just with physical strength, but with wisdom and his inner humanity. Uruk becomes not just a city, but a stronger society. Gilgamesh sees himself not only as a king, but as a leader who teaches his people what it means to be human. Thus, Gilgamesh's quest for immortality ends, but this journey teaches him the most valuable lesson. The meaning of life lies not in confronting death, but in accepting life as it is. As he continues to rule his people in Uruk, understanding the transient yet precious nature of life, he ushers in a new era for both himself and his people.